It's the entire world versus Israel on the Gaza war in a way. The Trump administration has become increasingly isolated in its position on Israel's war in Gaza. Britain, Canada, Australia, Portugal, France, Belgium, Monaco have recognized the state of Palestine, a move born out of frustration in a way over Israel's conduct in the war. The decision aligning these countries with more than 140 other countries also backing Palestinians' aspiration to forge an independent homeland from the occupied territories. And as per the latest count, at least 151 countries out of 193 UN members now recognize the state of Palestine. 6 European nations added their names to the list with statements at the UN on Monday, the day before the UK and Canada became the first G7 countries to make such a recognition, with Australia and Portugal also following suit. Russia, alongside all Arab countries, almost all African and Latin American states, and most Asian nations already recognize Palestinian statehood. As more and more countries recognize Palestinian statehood, Prime Minister Netanyahu is preparing his country for, in his words, a kind of isolation that could last for years. For the first time last week, Netanyahu conceded that international outrage over how Israel is waging the war in Gaza is turning Israel into a pariah. The annual United Nations General Assembly in New York is proof, in fact. But here's the cold, hard truth. While Netanyahu acknowledges Israel's growing isolation, he has used it as an opportunity to call on Israel's arm makers to step up their readiness. He has asked them to strengthen Israel's independent weapons industries so the country has arms independence. In fact, it's a reality. Israel and its arms makers have long produced some of the most cutting-edge weapons technology, and those weapons have been sold to countries around the world. But as international criticism of the war in Gaza escalates, Israel risks losing its position in some of those markets. And last week itself, Spain annulled hundreds of millions worth of orders for battlefield weapons made by Israeli companies. For now, the Israeli Ministry of Defense has reported $14.7 billion in export sales in 2024. Which is a 13% increase over the previous year. More than half of its defense deals were made with European countries. Israel's multi-billion-dollar arms industry sales are at a record high, in part because their weaponry is known as battle-tested. Israel's past 2 years of the war in Gaza, as well as operations in Lebanon, Iran, Yemen, have all helped solidify Israel's standing as a leading global arms supplier. The Arrow missile interceptor, made by Israeli arms manufacturer Israel Aerospace Industries, successfully intercepted Iranian ballistic missiles at high altitude during the 12-day conflict over the summer. And Israeli-made reactor armor also used routinely on IDF tanks and battle vehicles operating inside Gaza. And then there is the Israeli variant of the US origin F-35. It's now drawing attention to Israeli-designed upgrades. Still, the boom may be ebbing. As the war in Gaza drags on and on, it becomes more and more of a problem in a way. Around the world, ordinary citizens are protesting and asking their governments to do more to pressure Israel and stop its war on Gaza. Just today in Paris, people gathered once again to show solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza. In the UK, the British government last year suspended around 30 arms export sales to Israel, but exempted components for F-35 aircraft. The British government also banned Israeli government officials from attending the London Arms Fair. The Israeli government had slammed the decision, calling it a deliberate and regrettable act of discrimination. But Israel is facing similar moves from a number of its allies. This summer, the French government also shut down stands for major Israeli arms companies. Following Israel's recent strike on Hamas leaders in Doha, the UAE has also banned the Israeli government and defense companies from their Dubai Air Show, which is scheduled for November. So the way things stand right now, Israel can afford to keep fighting the war in Gaza, but the cost for Israel continues to go up. Nearly 40 hours after the airstrikes carried out by the Pakistan Air Force in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa's Tira Valley claimed the lives of at least 30 civilians, including women and children, no official statement that has come from the Pakistani establishment about this tragedy, even as anger continues to mount in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The Speaker of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Assembly on social media has said that these civilian deaths reveal just how vulnerable ordinary people remain, urging for a fair investigation, immediate relief, compensation, and rehabilitation for the affected families. Also warning, and I'm quoting here, when the blood of our own people is made so cheap and bombs are dropped on them, it is a fire that can engulf everyone, quote unquote. The Provincial Assembly member, Abdul Ghani Afridi, visited the site of the bombing and called the tragedy a slap in the face of humanity that shook the conscience of the entire region. Yet this incident in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa has produced little to no public uproar in Pakistan, especially when compared to similar events in other provinces like Punjab or Sindh, where any civilian incident typically triggers widespread protests, national media scrutiny, political backlash. In such provinces, operations that harm civilians, especially by the Pakistani establishment itself, usually force rapid responses from both the government and the opposition, leading to the question, would the response have been the same if there were bombs dropped on civilians in Punjab, for example? But in contrast, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa continues to receive silence in a way, and this pattern raises serious questions. Are people in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa treated differently by the state than those in other parts? And the Pakistani government reporting, in fact, the Pakistan government report suggesting. This report from Pakistan's National Commission for Human Rights from last year stating that Pashtun and Baloch communities in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan regularly report underrepresentation, economic neglect, human rights violations, including enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings. And there is historical context to this. Since independence, the Pakistani state has often regarded the frontier regions like Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, then known as Northwest Frontier Province, and Balochistan as peripheries. Investment in infrastructure, education, political power, even basic services lagged. And decades of conflict, military operations, insurgency have deepened the distrust. And when tragedy strikes these areas, the national reaction often remains muted. Another key point to note here is that Pakistan was originally created as a country of provinces with autonomy, but it quickly moved towards centralization, which has had major repercussions for the country. West Pakistan's refusal to share power with the larger East Pakistan led to the one unit scheme in the year 1955, fueling resentment, and one of the many key factors leading to Bangladesh's creation in 1971. And over time, this centralization has resulted in Punjabi dominance in Pakistan's power structure, leaving smaller provinces marginalized. So the bigger question still is, will this airstrike in Tira Valley be another pass in silence? Or will there be any kind of accountability and justice? History and recent events painting a grim picture. China's soybean imports hit a new record in August, and this is stinging the US because most of those soybeans did not come from the US but from Brazil. Can this be seen as another blow for President Trump and his trade policies is the immediate question. China's need to hedge against potential trade disruptions has pushed it to rely more on South America. In fact, Brazil now provides a staggering 85% of the soybean China buys. And this is a direct result of the ongoing trade tensions between Beijing and Washington. Last month, China imported over 12 million tons of soybeans, with Brazil supplying more than 10 million tons. That's a 2.4% increase from last year. In fact, this marks China's fourth consecutive month of record soybean purchases. As the country works to secure its food supply ahead of the U.S. harvest season, China's imports from Brazil grew by 2.4% year on year, with Brazil now firmly in the driver's seat as it provides more than 70% of China's soybean needs. The U.S., meanwhile, is left with just a small share of China's soybean market. In August, only 227,000 tons of soybean bought from American growers, which is just a fraction of China's total purchases. And with the trade talks between the two sides still at a deadlock in a way, U.S. soybeans largely have been priced out of the market. So as the trade war continues to reshape the global markets, it's also clear that Brazil is stepping into a bigger role, which is leaving the U.S. and its farmers struggling to regain their foothold. And with China pushing ahead with its South American strategy, it will be interesting to see how the U.S. responds in the coming months. But for now, it seems that Brazil has the upper hand in the soybean race. To stay up to speed with the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.